Welcome to another episode of Lore 1922, Dark Tides and Other Stories. Today we explore the harrowing tale of Henry Johnson and the Harlem Hellfighters as they find themselves thrown into a battle that defied all understanding. Along the way, the likes of Tesla and Einstein were brought into the fray for their unparalleled brilliance. As we delve into this story, we'll examine the stakes of this fight, the terrible consequences that unfolded, and the pressing question now hanging over everyone. Does America fall? Throughout mankind's history, there have been battles that have shaped the course of the future, but none as astounding and seemingly impossible as the battle at the border. As a leader of the Harlem Hellfighters, the unyielding Henry Johnson faces an unstoppable and cosmic force, leaving the safety of the United States in the balance. It is said that in times of great need, the greatest minds come together. This was no different. The prominent Nikola Tesla and esteemed Albert Einstein were called upon to lend their genius to the fight. They told us they were here to give us freedom. That voice who broadcast to us told us his solemn tale, how he lost everything he held dear, but then found the light in his faith. Tragically, many fell for this charade. Canada had imploded within a month. Most of South America had already fallen well before we had a clue to their arrival. Mexico was the last ally we had. Their resistance to the elder gods was immeasurable. Every man, woman, and child took up arms in protest, and were largely left alone by the self-proclaimed elder gods and their faithful. Europe unfortunately left our calls unanswered. We expected as much. They had barely just started to recover from the Great War. As for me, well, my name is not important. I'm here to tell you a tale. The story of Henry Johnson and the Harlem Hellfighters, what they did battling the crawling chaos at the Canadian border, must be shared. So please, listen and believe. That evening was cold and soggy. Light rain had filled the day, soaking everything to its core. Droplets clung desperately to the sharp ends of pine needles, holding on for dear life. The wildlife sought refuge in their homes as if they possessed an innate knowledge of the impending darkness that settled in. Autumn had a tight grip on the north as the piercing cold entrenched itself each evening, foretelling misery for those courageous enough to face it. The forest concealed a deep, dark secret. Humans cautiously positioned themselves along fence lines and tree lines, stealthily digging foxholes. They knew that the approaching night would be shrouded in darkness and consumed by utter chaos. In this dense wilderness near the Canadian border, a stubborn resistance fought against the nightmarish hordes of Cthulhu and the crawling chaos. As the sun sank below the horizon, a breathtaking display unfolded before our eyes. The autumn foliage came alive, ablaze with vibrant shades of fiery red, golden yellow, and delicate orange. These hues stood in striking contrast to the encroaching darkness that enveloped the landscape. This battle may determine the fate of America, and that responsibility rested on the shoulders of the 369th Infantry, the Harlem Hellfighters. These brave soldiers were tasked with defending the border and buying precious time for refugees to flee south. The Harlem Hellfighters, a disciplined and skilled fighting force, had a storied history full of heroic escapades in the Great War. They were currently led by the steely-eyed and charismatic Captain Henry Johnson. He was the kind of leader who would carve his way through any challenge, inspiring his men to follow suit. Armed with the alliance of the brightest minds of the century, Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla, they had blazed a path through the darkness, but the battle was far from over. As darkness descended, the forest awakened, emanating horrifying and monstrous cries that reverberated through the trees. It was a chilling omen of doom and terror for those who dared to oppose them. The onslaught commenced suddenly, with Cthulhu's cultists leading the charge. Their battle strategy was unmistakable, reminiscent of the Soviets' actions during the Great War. A relentless tide of human bodies surged forward, breaching the eastern defenses. The toll of casualties was staggering, yet inconsequential to those callous leaders. The Hellfighters fought valiantly on the eastern line, their weapons shimmering in the moon as they tore through the enemy ranks. But even with their advanced technology and unwavering courage, they were no match for the monstrous hordes of creatures that descended upon them. The cries of the fallen soldiers boomed throughout the woods, a chilling echo that signaled the loss of the eastern tree line. While bravely holding the north line, the Hellfighters confronted a colossal abomination, referred to as a Shoggoth, an enslaved being under the command of the elder gods. Forced into a war it may not even want. Its massive form was composed of what seemed like an ever-shifting mass of flesh and eyes, making it nearly impossible to strike a lethal blow. But Captain Johnson refused to back down, ordering his men to focus their fire on it. With a deafening roar, the Shoggoth charged towards them, unleashing a barrage of tentacles and acidic bile. The Hellfighters were nimble enough to evade its attacks and unleash their arsenal on the beast, finally bringing it down with a well-placed shot from one of Tesla's prototype lightning rifles. The victory was short-lived, however, as more creatures emerged from the shadows, forcing the Hellfighters to retreat and regroup. Currently, the northern and western lines held, as a profound silence enveloped the forest floor. The horde recoiled, stalling just out of sight. The soft crunch of approaching footsteps pulled Captain Johnson from his brief respite. The piercing blue eyes of Einstein met his, reflecting the urgency he felt within his core. "Captain," Einstein exclaimed breathlessly, "we've managed to slow the enemy's advance on the western fence line, but the tide may soon turn. They're holding back and appear to be building a larger group to push through. Tesla and I have come up with a plan that involves the Champlin power plant. It could buy us just enough time to regroup and get the hell out of here." Johnson nodded, realizing that every minute counted. He rallied his forces against the onslaught of aberrations gnawing at the edge of the forest. They pushed back the minions just far enough as the utter darkness of the night settled in. Then they began to systematically retreat to the power plant. There, Tesla tirelessly navigated the facility, modifying and wiring his electrotechnical inventions into the power grid. The Hellfighters set up defensive positions within the fence line of the facility, and they held the line with ferocious efficiency, banishing horrors back to the depths from whence they came. Rumors from this battle say the Hellfighters ascended to momentary godhood. They were invincible, fearless, and glowing in ominous light. Allow me to share my first-hand experience and confirm the truth of this. However, it's worth noting that the tales fail to adequately depict the full extent of the situation. As the hours dragged on, the hordes never breached the line. The night gradually surrendered to the ascent of a sinister moon. The golden autumn leaves turned crimson under its watch. The courage of the Harlem Hellfighters never faltered, but even they began to succumb to exhaustion. The horrors of war roared and swirled in their ears, threatening to ensnare their senses. When it seemed as though all hope was lost, a monumental crash echoed throughout the woods, followed by an ethereal light that bathed the landscape in a silver-blue hue. The massive metal structure housing all of the electrical wires running into the facility suddenly sprang to life, bolts of electricity arcing from one end to another. The resulting hum was simultaneously dreadful and mesmerizing, a symphony of power and beauty. Tesla could be heard throughout the forest, his maniacal laughter magnified by the surge of energy, almost mocking the elder gods. With a flash of radiant light, the immense machine Tesla had been working on buzzed to life. The hairs on the soldier's arms stood to attention. The static in the air was palpable. Bolts of electricity sailed wildly through the air in all directions, engulfing the encroaching nightmares. For a moment, time stood still, each monstrous scream an anthem of victory. But as the hordes fell back, a resolute darkness coiled in retaliation, and the machine's energy began to wane. In that moment, when all seemed lost, something unexpected happened. The soldiers felt a strange pull in their chests, as if they were being lifted by an invisible force. Tesla shouted over the din of battle, urging them to hold, and in unison they lifted into the air, their bodies glowing with pure energy. The Harlem Hellfighters, the heroes of this battle, had ascended to godhood. For a brief moment in time, they were immortal beings capable of incredible feats and brimming with cosmic power. They fought back against the elder gods with everything they had, their bodies and minds pushed beyond limits they hadn't even thought possible as they channeled their newfound abilities. Lightning and fire erupted from their hands, guns were now obsolete. Their enemies were engulfed in a symphony of obliteration. Lightning mingled with flames, magma rose under the feet of the horrors assaulting them. It seemed as though none could stand against the 369th Infantry. But, as quickly as it had come, their godhood faded away, leaving them back in their mortal forms. The machine sputtered, the mass of electricity ceased, its energy spent, and purpose seemingly fulfilled. The soldiers, now dazed and confused, were greeted by the cheers of their comrades. As quickly as the victory came, though, darkness began building for a fresh assault. Gazing at his troops, Captain Johnson saw that they had been pushed to the verge of shattering. In a bold move, he commanded Tesla to detonate his weapon, aiming to eliminate the lingering forces of darkness. He knew it was time to reconsider their strategy, to adopt something more sustainable. In a somber moment of clarity, he realized that to preserve their future, they needed to retreat. With a sigh, Johnson issued the order to fall back to the American capital, Washington, D.C. And so the Harlem Hellfighters retreated under the brilliant night sky, glowing with the residual electricity Tesla pumped into the atmosphere. The once beautiful landscape now left to the eroding grip of the crawling chaos. The sound of the weapon Tesla had created self-destructing paled in comparison to the incredible light show it put on. Bolts of lightning stretched and arced into the sky like mad vines for nearly 5 continuous minutes. Then a colossal explosion of blue and white momentarily turned the night into day. The battle at the border was over, but the war had barely begun. As they marched on, their gaze shifted to the stars above, and the realization that they were not alone in this fight dawned on them. Someone from the heavens bestowed them with incredible power. Even though it was for a short time, it may have saved their lives. The Harlem Hellfighters were no longer just soldiers. They were now humanity's last line of defense against the unrelenting forces of darkness. As they regrouped in Washington, D.C., Captain Johnson and his troops knew that they couldn't rely on temporary godhood to win this war. They needed a new plan, one that would allow them to fight back against the elder gods and win. They needed E-Souls. Rumors have fluttered around since the cryptic radio broadcast that Atlantis had risen in the Atlantic, and within its gilded walls an ally to humanity. If this episode of Lore 1922 Dark Tides and Other Stories has sparked your imagination and curiosity, please subscribe on Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or your preferred podcast platform. With every tale we share, our understanding of this extraordinary world grows, and we're eager to bring you on this journey with us. Until next time, thank you for venturing with us into the unknown.